The Nuts and Bolts of Writing, Season 2, a podcast where we talk about literature, the ins and outs of writing, and how to actually start writing.
Hey everybody, this is Tete DePunk, one of the co-hosts of the Nuts and Bolts in Writing. Today I will be interviewing writer Thomas Misuraca, who submitted his short story, Words in Enough Time, to issue 6 of our literary zine, The Unconventional Courier. I provided a link to the story in the description. Tom Misuraca studied writing, publishing, and literature at Emerson College in his hometown of Boston. After graduation, he moved to Los Angeles, where he splits his time between writing and graphic design. Over 120 of his short stories have appeared in publications worldwide. In 2021, his story, Giving Up the Ghosts, was nominated for a Pushcart Prize. 2 of his novels have been published, including the vampire parody novel Lifestyles of the Dam. He self-published a collection of his early short stories entitled If You Read This, You Will Die. He is also the multi-award winning playwright with over 150 short plays and 13 full-length produced globally. His musical, Geeks, was produced off-Broadway in May of 2019. This year, his full-length play, In Dogs We Trust, won second place in the Robert J. Pickering / J.R. Colbeck Award for Playwriting Excellence. He won the award in 2014 for his superhero nursing home play Golden Age, which will have its West Coast premiere at the Tehachapi Community Theater this June. You can follow Tom on Twitter at Musical Geeks, at Geeks Musical, and Instagram at Misuraca. Check out his website at www.tommiz.com. Hello, Tom. How are you? Welcome to the... Oh, very, it's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you. So welcome to the Nuts and Bolts in Writing. So recently you had your story, Words in Enough Time, published in one of our volumes. And I want to say that the story really resonated with us at the Unconventional Courier, particularly with myself when I read it. I was really struck by how you describe the impact of books and how books with their stories and characters can stay with us like loyal companions or teachers. It really struck a particularly strong chord with me. Would you say that was based on a lot of your own experiences?
In a sense, yes. It's a fictional story. It's not anything based to what happened to me, but the theme, as you said, of literature being like a friend, always being there for you, having that shared experience of literature, of a book that you read. If somebody else has read that book, you already have accumulated knowledge of something that you can share together. And books are great for many reasons, that especially solitude, and we learned that a lot during the pandemic, is you could get lost in them and you can find your own little world, and the outside world seems a little less obtrusive for a little while. But as I said, again, if you meet someone and you have that shared love of literature, it's so exciting. And even what's better, sometimes like you could talk to people who love literature and neither of you have scratched the surface of what the other like there's so many authors, there's so many books, that it's just a great way to connect to people. And for those of us who are lifelong readers, it's wonderful to see our love of literature evolving as we age.
That's very true. I saw that in the story, how it evolves, how it takes a different form and a different nature, and it becomes all the more rewarding. It doesn't really diminish, but it takes on sort of a kind of a golden glow as it changes its nature.
Yes. And what I enjoy now, being, I hate to say the word middle-aged, is one of the things I enjoy is going back and reading something that I enjoyed when I was younger, or just something I read when I was younger, and taking in all this knowledge I have now. And, it's amazing how the book transforms from when I read it when I was younger. Sometimes I love it more. Sometimes I don't like it as much as I did. I always note The Great Gatsby. When I was a kid, I read it and I loved these people and I so wanted to be them when I grew up. And then when I read The Great Gatsby as an adult, I was like, hey, they're kind of spoiled brats.
Right. It's like some red flags there with the whole
Mm-hmm.
cast,
Yes.
Yeah. I know what you mean. I've had similar experiences. Like, you read ye old English literature and you're like, you admire this sense of striking nature, but then you realize, oh my, this was rather destructive. We should not do this.
Exactly. Mhm.
Yes. And well, I just wanted to say that, it was absolutely rewarding that you reached out to our publication. We are very honored to have you in the zine. And now as we speak on the podcast, and I wanted to touch too, that we're going to explore, you have an impressive catalog of work ranging from plays to full-length novels. So first question, Tom, how do you decide if a story is going to be a play or a piece of prose?
Well, a lot of it has to do with what I feel the main gist of the story is. It's easy to basically say if I feel that it's a story that is a lot of dialogue and people talking back and forth to each other, of course, that's obviously going to be a play. But I also feel like if it's a story that has a bigger scope to it, where it involves a lot of time, for instance, Words Enough in Time, that's a whole lifetime of somebody and their reading from, birth, almost cradle to grave. Unfortunately, of course, I think something like that could be done on stage, but to me, the love of that, and also, of course, it being about the written word, I felt that that was more important being a piece of prose. Um, I always harken back to one of my writing classes when I attended Emerson College in Boston. One of my teachers used to say he could write pages and pages of descriptions, but when he got to dialogue, it terrified him. And I felt I was the opposite. I'm like, that's weird because I love writing dialogue. When I get to description, that's what terrifies me. So I also feel like if I'm trying to create a world more than telling a specific action story, that's where I feel prose is great, that I can, really give the time to paint a scene, paint a world, paint a character. Where theater, there's definitely still a lot of painting of characters and worlds, but I feel you're kind of dropped into it very quickly and you just have to take off and running, and the actions and the words are what push the story forward.
That's very interesting. It's a bit of a and it's versus the pacing of it too. Like you said, if there's more of a description or a painting this world, prose would serve that better. But then if it's something more like say action oriented, that you're sort of building the character through the motion of action, then that's where play would benefit that characterization.
And I think time, as you mentioned, time is, the pacing is another aspect of it, because that's what I love about prose, and that you can just slow down and take a look at the world that this character is in, and you don't quite have time for that in theater, or you're just going to lose your audience. But readers, and as we say in Words Enough in Time, people love to dig in and get the details of the worlds that we create.
That's very true. I think that can also be applied to like the different mediums, such as like say, graphic novel. I think a lot of people who are used to prose aren't used to the net break characterization in graphic novel or comics as they are. And I had that discussion with a friend. I was quite nursed on graphic novels and comics growing up, but I was introducing it to my friend, and my friend had some difficulty trying to digest the breakneck characterization, like 2 or 3 panels. That's all the info you're getting for right now.
Yes, yes, and I'm all for graphic novels as literature. I'm a big, comic book fan. My big musical was about the Comic Con and cosplay, world, and I've written a lot of stuff that could be, comic book oriented. So I think maybe to even further stretch, like how do it? To me, it's this: how does the story dictate to be told? I think it's instinct. Sometimes I feel the story needs to be prose. Sometimes I feel the story needs to be a play. A few times something poetry. And if I had more illustrative talents, I think I would be writing more graphic novels. I have written some scripts for graphic novels. One of my day jobs actually is writing comic books for kids with chronic illnesses. So I do love that format as well. But at the end of the day, I think the story instincts the format.
That's very true. And also, major props to you for what you do. That work truly does help a lot of people. And, I say that as a kid who had gone through some difficult things, and comics were definitely there for me growing up. So thank you for the work you do.
You're welcome.
Yes.
I mean, everything I write is rewarding, but writing, to be more specific, I write comic books for kids with hemophilia and sickle cell disease. And because I'm a little removed from it, like I am my theater, my writing, where I'm more on top of the end results. I don't go to the places where these books are being handed out, but I've heard from people who are handing them out how people are excited. They want to see the next adventure. A lot of it because it's a fun little adventure comic, but the other part of it is because there's characters in these books that resemble them that they don't see.
And that is very important. A lot of people, who are not, who may not be experiencing that or seeing that, may not realize the significance of that, but there is a heavy significance in that for sure.
Oh yes, and I feel that with all writing as well. That's people like, oh, what do you write about? I said I always try to write about the people who I don't feel get their stories told, and also I want to tell the stories differently. Definitely write a lot about the gay community, but I don't want to write another coming out story. I want to write a story about somebody who's going through life and just happens to be gay. I write a lot about geek culture, which I think is, the same with us who love to read. When we find somebody who reads the same graphic novels as we do, there's a shared experience. Things like, I'm not a D&D player myself, but I love that world. I love that community. And, I actually did write a play about a D&D type community and, what happens when the game ends and they have to grow up. And because I think anything that brings people together, anything that they believe in should be part of all of art.
That is so true. That is so true. And you're so right about that. I myself am, uh, I haven't really been officially into the D&D, but I've always had a soft spot for medieval fantasy and, geek culture. I've been sort of a DC fan since I was a kid. And I always tell people since 1997. When I could
Nice.
first read, yeah. And yeah, since I could
We'll,
read
we'll,
as
we'll, we'll talk more when we're not recording, because I could go off on DC and Marvel and how that affected me growing up. And
yes.
you know maybe one of these days you'll see my name in the byline of a Batman or detective comic. That would be my dream come true. So
I know what you mean. I feel the same way for the Big Blue Boy Scout. um but yes, before we lapse into uh geeking, so to speak, I did want to geeking out. I did want to say, given the sometimes fluid nature of writing, do you ever find that, I guess we did explore this, but do you feel like they can be interchangeable, or do you feel like, as you said, with some stories, it could only be done, in a certain venue and like in a
I think
certain, format?
I think it's like one of those two circle diagrams where there's the circle and then there's where they meet in the middle. There are certainly some plays that I don't think could ever be, novelized, and some novels that can never be, turned into a play. But I think there's a little ground in the middle, especially for shorter pieces. Because again, I would write prose at the beginning. Theater didn't quite seem like what I wanted to do. I really wanted to be a writer, the next Stephen King, the next Joyce Carol Oates, the next John Updike, you name it. So a lot of the short stories that I wrote were very heavy dialogue. And I remember somebody saying, have you ever thought of writing a play? And I said, well, I've dabbled with that, but I never really thought of that. And then when I kind of got into writing for theater and was bitten by the theater bug, it was almost like a drug. All I was writing was theater for a little while, and then I was like, wait a minute, I still love prose. Let me try to find that balancing act of writing both. And there'll be times where I'll have a piece that is a short story or short play, and I send it out to places, and rejection after rejection, and I'm like, well, this doesn't seem to be finding the audience in the literary world, or this doesn't seem to be finding the audience in the theater world. So I'll change it up and change the format because I feel it's that fluid. And sometimes it'll happen. Actually, the most recent piece that I got accepted was a former 1 minute play, which I write a lot of those for a lot of contests they have around the country, the world, actually. Like GI60 does one in Brooklyn in England. And so I have all these 1 minute plays that haven't been produced. And when I was kind of going through them, I was like, well, this one might actually be a good little short story. Even though it's all dialogue, I think it's kind of fun. And I wrote it up as a very, very short piece. And it was probably the last piece that I just had accepted. So you never know.
You never know, and that's so true. And I understand. I myself, for a lot of times, I do prefer dialogue, over description, or a character's thought process, just because so much of our character and personality as people can be revealed through our dialogue and how we verbally express ourselves with one
Mhm.
another. That's true. And I
Exactly.
yeah. And I did want to ask too, this is something many writers, including myself, find ourselves having to make this particular decision when it comes to a work or even a scene from a work, uh, writing dialogue versus writing a description. For you, do you prefer writing dialogue or description, or would you say they're about equal, as you
Oh,
were describing?
I'd say 95% dialogue. I love writing dialogue. I love just getting in there and having two, three, five. I even, I love having a room full of people talking, and just, like each person having their own personality, pop up in there. I feel it always seems like a writer shouldn't say that they have a gift, but I feel if I have a gift as a writer, it is to write dialogue. It is to write, actually, humorous dialogue is probably what I write best. And and again, I think there's humor room for prose as well. So yes, I will write a piece of prose that has a lot of humorous dialogue. The plus of prose, and I know I'm kind of going back to what we're talking about, is I can even make the narration sound like dialogue, which is a great benefit of, that you can't, I mean, you can have narration in a play. Sometimes I feel that might be too much, but I think if you can have a very conversational sounding narrator, and that in itself is dialogue. But when it comes down to it, I do enjoy, I it flows, dialogue can flow out of me, where descriptions and regular prose, I wouldn't say it's a struggle, but it definitely is a lot more. I have to sit down, I have to focus. And the editing process, I feel when I write dialogue, it's almost finished when I write it. When I'm writing prose, there's definitely a lot of editing, a lot of red pen taken to it.
True, true. In many ways, sometimes when, with prose, when it's necessary to have a description, it can sort of feel like a speed bump to the, faster, fluid speed of, the dialogue that's being, created and put out there.
Exactly. And I know and that's again the benefit of prose is that you can say things, you can fill in the reader with prose that you can't do in a play, because it sounds like on the nose dialogue. When like, oh, when you're saying, oh, so and so, she's saying this because her husband left her, you can give that hint a little bit more in prose, where you have to, in dialogue, if it's specifically a play, you have to say it without saying it a lot of the time. And again, sometimes I feel that comes naturally, but sometimes that's also a challenge as well, is to not is to make sure you're not telegraphing to the audience.
That's true. That is a huge challenge, especially in the, in the more, how do I say, the more faster nature, of play versus prose. And and sometimes, you can work in certain things with, dialogue, but then you always have to be worried about, is this too much info dumping? Was that cleverly, woven into the uh revelation of that character? Or is it just, like you said, on the nose, just sort of a, it's kind of like having a neon arrow pointing to the point.
Yeah. I used to, so like when I would do research, and I've also seen this with other authors, when they would do research about a subject and they want to get this information into a play, you always have to say, like, okay, you don't need to tell us that you know the history, your character knows the history of golf. You have to show us that they know the history of golf. You can't, like maybe a statistic or two, but you can't have him, ravel off the entire history of golf, or you're going to bore your audience. Now, in a novel, you can do that a little bit more interestingly, where like you can give that information to the audience of, like, of saying that, oh, this character researched this or learned this from something, and you can tell that, and it feels natural to the story because you're showing this character's, background. And that's, again, a plus for prose writing, that you can really dive, as we said, into characters, but you can also dive into these worlds, and you can give a little bit more fact. You can actually telegraph some, if you say like this is their researching, or you can, say, oh, they read this article, and you write an article and put it into the piece. That's the spot I feel you get to, work a little bit more. And now, that being said, I hope it's interesting, and I hope it's still pushes the story forward, even in a novel.
That's very true. That is true, because it's, you do want to get that information out there. It's just a matter of how you put it, where you put it, and when you put it, makes all the difference in, really keeping the audience hooked in. But, as well as yourself, like whenever you look at something, sort of read it like the audience, and that way you have a better perception of what the audience is perceiving.
Exactly. And I think that's the important thing. And a lot of writers, I hate to say, there's a bit of self-indulgence, but all of writing is self-indulgence. You're telling a story. But I think when you get to the point of, okay, I want to do something with this play or short story or novel or script or graphic novel, you have to make sure that the final product is something that, and I know this is a scare, is marketable, is readable, is interesting, is going to get people to show up or buy or just talk about as well.
That is so true. I think that is something that, many writers, falter upon. They may not be keeping the audience in mind, or like you said, marketable, what's making people, really grab their attention. And I was going to say, for the last question, I was going to say, what kind of summates all this in your experience? How does the creative process differ between the two, for prose and
Yeah,
playwriting?
it feels, because it's how I'm imagining it in my mind. Like, I guess plays are easier to describe, because when I'm writing out a play, I'm thinking of actors on a stage, reading words, moving around, doing things. What are the what are the lights going to be? And I remember the rookie mistakes I made as a young author, and actually a play that ended up getting produced. The director was like, yeah, we had to put a little something in the middle because you kept the main character on stage the entire play, and she didn't have a break. So that's something else I have to think. So theater and playwriting, you kind of have to think of the what the end result is going to be. Whereas prose, I can, that's where, again, you can sit down, let yourself go, be self-indulgent, tell the story you want to tell, take your time, not having to worry about a stage budget, and not having to worry about how is this going to be produced. You can just go. I can have aliens, I can have worlds blow up, I can go to 1,000 different locations. So I think when I'm sitting down to write something prose, I can sort of let myself go a little bit more. And not that I don't let myself go in dramatic work. I just feel that it's a little bit more blinders on of how to get that piece, how to tell the story in that format is a little bit more, it has a few more gatekeepers.
That's very true. I believe you're right. I think there's a lot of people who would, for that particular, process versus process, there's more gatekeepers. I think there's more critics. But, comparing one versus the other with the other one, there seems to be like there's more openness, there's more of a not so much a laxity, but like there's no set rules for someone to say this is wrong, although you will get people who may pop up and say this is wrong, because there always has to be that one person.
And again, definitely you have to be prepared for that in theater, because you're going to get people from stage readings onto production. People are always going to give you feedback, like it or not. But the other thing I like about theater is the collaborative process, where when I write a piece of theater, I bring it into a workshop usually, and actors will read it, and I'll get a feedback session. And that's great. I mean, and there's been times where I will continue to grow a character based on how an actor was reading it. And then we'll put it up on its feet and look how it looks on stage. And even then I'll be a little bit more inspired, like, oh, maybe, more movement or less movement, or this person isn't working in this scene. So I really feel that it's sort of exciting. And if you keep your mind open to the possibilities, what other people are going to bring, theater can end up, being a wonderful collaborative process. And at the end, have a great piece of work. That's not to be said that prose doesn't have that, because you have editors and stuff like that. But I feel you can, it's sort of a solitary thing. And I think, I don't want to say I like one more than the other, but I enjoy the end result of drama a little bit more than I do of prose, because there's nothing better than sitting in an audience and hearing an audience react to what you've written, hearing them laugh, hearing them gasp, or whatever. That's there's no feeling like that in the world.
And that in itself is a feeling that, that's hard to recreate with prose. Like you said, prose is it's more of a solitary activity. And I think it's also wonderful too how you described with, theater and drama, that there's more of this collaborative process, and it has a more there's a certain organic energy that comes from this collaboration, and how that influences the outcome of the finished product.
And that being said, to tag back to Words Enough in Time, the other reason why I love writing prose as well is because there's nothing better than to hear that something you wrote, like someone like the Unconventional Courier says, hey, we like this really spoke to our people, and you see the feedback. I think there's almost a different, because now you know that somebody's really sitting down and reading and absorbing the words that you wrote, and that is just as wonderful. Might not be as immediate as theater is, but the great part about prose is I'll have people like come back and like, hey, we read this thing you wrote 10 years ago and it really affected us. So I mean, all writing hopefully will last as long as we last and longer. But I feel like prose sometimes has a little bit more of a shelf life when it's out there, and in bookstores and in on the internet.
That's very true. That's very true. It is sort of, as they say, words immortalized. And, you are right. It's not an instant gratification, but there is this, slower, more, set in stone, so to speak, as long as there is, publication existing. And that's something for, I think, writers to consider whenever they feel discouraged, that there will be people out there who, their stories, will affect them, and people will be grateful that these, stories were written and everything.
Exactly. And the dream would be that, like Words Enough in Time, maybe someday two people will be discussing something that I wrote and they'll bond over it. And that would be what it's all about.
That is so true. That is the perfect, encapsulation of, what should bring the writer, satisfaction. And this was a very, wonderful conversation, we had today, Tom. We hope to hear from you, again, not only, if you ever want to submit to us again, but, hopefully we can have you on here for another conversation, because I feel like we've just, scratched the surface of so many things we could discuss.
Yeah, we'll do that graphic novel one sometime too. So
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I do want to thank you again for your time. Thank you for coming onto the podcast. It was an honor to interview you. It was an honor to have your fantastic work. Thank you for, bringing your work to the world, and, thank you for all you do. It was wonderful having you here. Thank you.
you're very welcome. Thanks as well.
Thank you. Well, we wish you all the best, and hope to hear from you again. And I wish you all the best with everything else that you're doing. Do you have any new projects that you'll be maybe doing like this year or in the very, very near future?
My superhero nursing home play, Golden Age, is opening in Tehachapi, California in June. It's a little off the beaten path theater wise, but hopefully if anyone just happens to be in that area, I think it's going to be a fun show. And meanwhile, I'm just working on trying to get a few collections of short stories together. I did self-publish one. I would like the next one to be perhaps published by some mainstream publisher at some point. So I'm working on getting that together. But I'm always writing and always submitting and always keeping at it. So always something new pops up, and I'm sure 2023 will be no different.
That is awesome to hear, and I wish you all the best. I hope Golden Age is a big, big success. I myself am going to do research and, see if I can read reviews or, see excerpts of it. And I'm very excited to see that, because that's something that certainly touches some things that I am quite a fan of. And I wish you all the best, and thank you again so much for coming on here today. And we wish you the best for 2023 and beyond.
Thank you, and thanks for giving us all a voice.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you then.
All right. Take care.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.